we use a former head of the British Army to take them through a scenario. And that scenario is the situation in Somalia. And it's very, very complex. VUCA, they're volatile, uncertain, complex and ambiguous.
And welcome to the latest episode of Human After All. This week, I am absolutely delighted to have Brian Moone as my guest. Brian has spent 2 decades proving that leadership isn't just about driving change, it's about shaping how change is understood and sustained. From founding Mace Business School to advertising government on national leadership frameworks, he has shown how culture, learning and systems thinking can turn industry into classrooms for progress. This conversation will explore what the future of leadership looks like when AI meets real experience, when frameworks become living systems, and when progress is built around people, not just performance. Welcome, Brian.
Thanks, Juliette, and thanks for having me on the show.
It's an absolute pleasure. Right, let's kick off. So, first question. You've spent your career not just leading change, but really redefining what leadership is. So what sparked your curiosity in this area so early on?
Okay, so I have a natural curiosity. I suppose the question why is my favourite question. I go back to, so I started out, so Mace Business School is part of a large construction company. So I started out in the construction industry, actually as a carpenter and joiner. And it's been my whole journey of the question why. Why do I have to do the things that I do as a carpenter? Could I change it? Is there a way to change it? So that led me to become a supervisor and then a manager. When I became a manager, I'm still asking the question why. Who's shaping what I'm doing within the industry? So I became a client, a surveyor, a chartered surveyor. All this time, I'm back at college studying 13 years day release tech college. So I didn't start out as an academic. So it's interesting that I've ended up where I am. And that journey of why, as a chartered surveyor, I probably thought I was top of the tree. I was leading big projects and acting as client on many opportunities. And then I started to ask the question, why again? Why do I have to do it within this legislation? Why? Who's making up the rules? Obviously, things like building regulations and the design regulations, all sorts of things. So I got an opportunity to join the Chartered Institute of Building and become a director of the professional body that I'd become a member of. So I'm a chartered builder and a chartered surveyor. And I started to get opportunities to shape the future. And that was great. It's great fun. But it was often responding. And then another opportunity came up, which was to lead change within the entire industry. The government came up with a scheme. It was called Rethinking Construction. And it was led by people from the automotive industry. And it was an opportunity to really shape change. And I stepped into that role again, I suppose, still with that curiosity of why do we do the things we do? And that took me into looking at not just the best in construction, but also the best in automotive, aerospace, lots of different industries, and say, are there lessons to be learned that can help improve the productivity of the construction industry? And that's where I got, and one of the companies that brought me in contact with was Mace, and they were one of the demonstration projects that often were leading the way in that space. And they turned around to me and said, yeah, it's all very well preaching it, Brian. What about coming and doing it? So I got thrown in and said, okay, what does it actually look like? And that's where the business school was born from.
Fantastic. So as I understand it, Mace Business School was created to kind of embed leadership and, learning inside Mace as a group, which, as you said, is a huge building construction global company.
Yeah.
What specific problem were you tasked with in terms of Mace Business School?
So as well as Mace staff, actually, what is unique is we focused on the supply chain. So Mace is the part that I was working, construction management company, we're very heavily reliant on a large supply chain of specialist contractors, and they vary in size and complexity of their organisations. But many are, because of the complexity of the projects that we were delivering, people are not familiar. At the time, it was things like the Shard, and we were running the Olympic programme, not building the buildings, but actually running the programme. The companies that we were working with, many of the people, like myself, have come up from the trades. They end up in a management role, and they need to be able to demonstrate a competence in a leadership and management capacity. And that's where we were identifying the gaps. One, they didn't have the operational management capability, so we worked with them on that. And one of the unique things we did there was, instead of bringing external trainers in to deliver the training, we used Mace own staff to teach, particularly around operational management and leadership. That had two benefits. One, it meant that it was current, relevant training. It wasn't taught by somebody who'd been in the industry 20 years ago and was teaching from a textbook. If you taught it today, that same person was managing you tomorrow. They had to be doing what they were saying in the training. So it became relevant and appropriate to the learner. It also built relationships, and you'll hear me talk a lot about the power of human relationship, and that to me was the essence of what we did. So in simple terms, we always used to talk about, it's not just what you know, but it's who you know in business, and we would create relationships through that working. Then you escalate up above the level of operational management, and then you get into leadership. And one of the things again was about ensuring that the companies, particularly the supply chain companies that we were working with, had the appropriate leadership level to deliver what we were doing. And very often that's about teaching them to widen their vision, that it wasn't about just being better operationally. But you did the famous horse meat scandal, where the supply chain takes the client, with them when something goes wrong. We don't want the supply chain company to take one of our blue chip clients down because of an action that they take. So they've got to understand that it isn't just about, my simple terminology, banging nails into bits of wood. I don't want to oversimplify it, but it is about understanding, the diversity and inclusion, modern slavery, carbon reduction, or every aspect of a business. And then above all of that, it's all a human endeavor. It's all about the people. And then how do you create the people that follow you as a leader? And so we set up a leadership program for our supply chain in particular, and the next generation of leaders, having invested, say it's 20 years of the business school, have invested 10 years of creating relationships, and then the leader changes. And we often talk about the shadow of the leader. The leader changes and the behaviours suddenly shift. Rather than leave that to chance, who's the next leader, we started to train the future leaders in our supply chain to make sure that when they came in, they understood the values that we were trying, and embedded those values within their business. So it was a whole, it's creating an ecosystem really, not just seeing it as training.
I mean, it's just fascinating the impact that you must have had on such a global audience, but also just the size of the impact that you're trying to make because of the supply chain. And I know specifically the Mace Business School obviously operates in the area of construction, but
Yep.
I'd love to get your thoughts on what consistent patterns you've seen that could maybe be mapped to other organisations to help them develop their people, because these tools and this structure that you're talking about is equal for many different, I would imagine.
Yeah, I've looked at this in many angles, and as I say, a lot of what I'm putting into construction is based on what I've learned from other industries anyway. And I also do some non-executive work with businesses in all other sectors. So I'm constantly looking at where the opportunities, and there are so many crossovers. The first time you go and advise a business not in your sector, you're very nervous, and then all of a sudden you find out they're facing the same problems, and it's mostly around the people, but supply chain and the usual sort of thing. The other thing I found with construction, we're very fortunate I'm very fortunate in that I see. So if you take a construction project, several £100 million project, it's like a business startup. And we're doing that 60 to 100 times a year. We are seeing 60 to 100 startups. And I can go and see almost a business leader within a project applying the techniques and things that we're talking about as they build the culture of the teams. That, you take something like the Shard and the thousands of people that are working for the project leader on that. And it's got every aspect of a business within the project. And so I've been able to see, not many people get that opportunity to see that repetition and to see and compare so directly where good leadership works and where it doesn't work. And I think, one of the things that I found with that is that, when you walk onto a site, and walk into a company, you can feel that it's a good company. And what is it that sits behind that? And I think one of the things for me is the language used within the business. Do they talk about sort of we and us and or is it them or I, which is negative? I'm fighting the battles, it's against them. What you want is a culture within a business that is I used to go to a coffee shop, and just as an example of something where I just observed something where it was part of a chain, but it was just a small shop, and one lady working it all. And when there was a bit of a problem with the door one time, and she would say, sorry about my door. And, she could have easily said, I'm sorry, but the company are not doing something about it. She owned that door, this space, or, she minded when her floor wasn't clean. She didn't ever talk about it as being somebody else. They'd obviously created a culture that she felt that she had that sort of dynamic within. And that is, as a very simple version of what you feel when you walk into a,
Sorry.
That's right. It's what you feel when you walk into a good company that's properly led, from the top. I suppose one of the other things I'd like to say is just when the leaders have time, they are not busy fools or panicking or feeling that they've got to do everything, because unless they've got time, then they don't have time for their people. And one of the roles of the leader is to shield their people, to direct, to give them the time to coach and lead them when, and to listen to their concerns. And if they can get to that point, I always call it the light touch on the tiller. They're not zigzagging their ship from side to side to try and overcome the next problem. They're just keeping it, the ship on course. The busy leaders don't have the time. They are steering from crisis to crisis. The good leaders, they've got time. I can walk in there and they'll share with me what they're doing. They'll show me. And when I ask questions about their business, they'll go and get their team members to come and talk to me about it. They trust their people. That's another one that I see.
Yeah, I think your point about culture is it's just all pervading, really. And
Yep.
it's something that I think, organizations really struggle on putting their finger exactly on, like, how do we create the culture that we want? So I think that's fascinating. But just kind of chunking up even further.
Yeah.
Not only have you spent, a lifetime helping, construction industry and supply chain, but you've also had impact on government and government policy. I would love to know, a little bit more about that. I mean, where do you think leadership and development breaks down in policy and, even wider in culture, and in, national areas?
So, yeah, I'm working on a rewrite of a PAS 8672, which is all around as a result of the Building Safety Act, which came out of the Grenfell disaster. And one of the things that wasn't identified there was competence, that there was evidence that competence wasn't being assessed or put in place. And I'm starting to try and look at, how do you, there's been some fantastic work on it up until this point, but I think it's been a sort of a bit of an iterative process, and we're back round now about what is it, what's the next stage. And I think with anything like that, you need to have guidelines that enable people and frameworks, but they must be flexible enough. And one of the things I really don't like is when it becomes either so, the framework becomes so tight, or the guidelines or the policies are managing the people rather than the people, using the policies to manage. And I think, one of the things that sitting in a working group at the moment, and people are sort of, we can't change this because that's, it's already written. And I'm like, we need to revisit everything. You can't just accept that just because somebody wrote it before, that is the right way. Let's challenge it, let's discuss it, let's debate it, let's really think about it. And I think, one of the things that I think from an education point of view we've lost is that it's been sort of through the sort of industrialisation of learning to try and get as many people trained as possible. We've kind of lost the ability to think, tend to, I love the sort of Socratic approach to, Socratic thinking, and because that takes you back to the basic principles of questioning everything. Don't just accept it. And there was some very wise words from the Greek philosophers that had time to think about these things. And we've ended up with, can you repeat parrot fashion this or that? Or can you get through a set of e-learning slides and tick the boxes at the end of it? I think we've lost direction a little bit about what it is we want from our people.
Yeah, and I think that's particularly pertinent now with the demand for future forward skills and digital skills. And I think a lot of the training that is happening in organizations is not encompassing the required skills that are needed. A lot of organizations don't even know what those skills are, let alone have things in place to actually meet those. So that kind of idea of almost like pivoting in the flow of, a training program, I agree entirely, is one of those things that it's difficult to manage that balance between, adhering to compliance and adhering to standards, while at the same time having like a future forward, focus.
Yeah, I mean, one of the things that we try and instill in all our training, and it's something we've discussed before, which is conversational learning, as opposed to here's a set of things that you need to know. We have a diagram that we use, which goes from a situation where a pure trainer, has content that they have to get across, and that's your typical e-learning. And there's a diagonal line which goes across to pure facilitation, where there is no content and the facilitator relies on the content coming from the room. So they've got tools and techniques for extracting ideas from people. So there may be a agenda there. We try across that sort of diagonal line of, you've got 100% knowledge you've got to transfer, and over here there's knowledge is in the room. But obviously somewhere along that continuum is the position you want to settle on, but it's being brave enough to edge people, getting our trainers, and bearing in mind that my trainers, they're not seasoned trainers in the business school stuff, and a lot of stuff in the leadership they are, but in the business school operational training, they're subject matter experts. They know their stuff. They actually don't need any content. I also think that, as most of the people I train are senior people, as a senior person, most senior people, when they want to learn, they've normally got somebody on speed dial they can ring up and ask. I've got my lawyer, I've got my doctor, I've got my whatever, my cost, my accountant or whatever. What do I do in this situation? You don't go, they don't typically think, I want a course. So how do we give them that same experience? Because then that's a conversation. And then afterwards you ask them about it, and they've absorbed everything. They've learned and wanted to try and create that experience. And the other challenge we get is, because when we're teaching, running our courses, the ability of the people in the room can vary greatly. I'm going to have a grad who's come along for the first time, and you can have somebody 35 years experience on plus, a lot of wisdom. And some of our trainers have said, can't you split them into two groups? Wouldn't it be better to, teach them separately because they need to know different? I said, no, get them all talking, because actually the grad will tell you about AI, social media, whatever, technology, whatever thing, and the experience will give you the wisdom and the knowledge and the scars and everything else that they've had out of it, and then put the two together, and the learning doesn't have to come from the person at the front. The person at the front should facilitate all of that to enable it to happen. So yeah, I think one of the and obviously, when we were first doing this was all face to face in terms of, I said, in person, and then we shift to COVID and online, and then you have to repeat this process in this sort of environment where it's an online. But actually, that's where we've developed a lot of the conversational stuff, because then that allows people in their own spaces to still be feel part of the collective. You've got to try and find ways of not just letting them feel that, well, I'm in a different space to everybody else, so I'm not part of that discussion and that debate. You've got to draw them in and make them feel that they belong. And that's something we work hard on.
Brian, I think what you're saying is that when you create these learning programs, you put people at the heart, right? So it's almost like you're focusing on the audience rather than focusing on the curricula. Could you build a bit more and give us some examples of what that principle looks like in action?
Yeah, sure. It definitely, I'm fascinated by how people learn, not how to teach. And a lot of people who look at teaching look at how can you get better at teaching, but you can't really meet that until you work out how people learn. And people learn in so many different ways. And I know this is something that you're quite passionate about, is that the obviously neurodiversity, all sorts of things like that, can very much impact the styles of learning that people work within. So if you're not taking all of that into account, and you're not taking into account the different abilities within the room, then you're or on the screen, you're only really optimizing a small percentage of the people that you have in front of you. So allowing time and space for people to air their own points, give their own understanding, and bring that into the group is very, very valuable, because then everybody understands. There is also understanding other people's perspectives. So one of the things that I do when I want to learn, and I said, I'll go and find someone on, I've got somebody on speed dial. I actually don't have one person on speed dial. I have several people on speed dial, because I'll go and ask, particularly in my world, I might want to ask a cost person, a health and safety person, environment person, design led person. You get sort of, again, you're passionate about the Bloom's taxonomy, where it's not just about knowing the facts and the knowledge. It's the higher level orders that we need to be bringing out within these people, the synthesis and the understanding sort of levels, and the creation at the top of the tree, so that we don't just bog everybody down, but you start to give them different perspectives. And I think that reconnects some of the brain signals into being curious and inquisitive and all of the rest of it. Because if you're just sitting there and you just think you're there you're just on the receive mode, and I'll just write it all down, whatever they say, and apply it, you're not firing the right parts of the brain that then get it bedded in. And you want somebody that goes, I've heard that, but what about if I took it at this angle or looked at it this way? They're really taking it in then, and they're really challenging it. So yeah, it's still difficult in a one-to-many scenario. So when you're and there's economic reasons for doing that. I can't bring in an individual trainer for every person. But again, going back to old ways of learning, it was a master and apprentice. They invested the time in the individual to bring, when I did my apprenticeship, I was assigned to a master craftsman, who then taught me, and my success was on them. So I think, that there's an element that we've had to try and industrialize it to try and get as many people through. And I say industrialize, it's like production line training, and that's okay if you only want to get 30%, 50% success rate out of it, but I think there's more.
Yeah, I mean, I think it's fascinating, isn't it, how people really enjoy applied or experiential learning. So actually using their brains, it's when they become active, when they're actually doing something with the learning rather than so applying the knowledge rather than actually just doing the learning. And
Yes.
it always seems interesting to me that when you see an excited bunch of students or an excited group of people being trained, it's when they're unleashing their thoughts and perspectives on that knowledge or what they're learning that the room really comes alive. So, I mean, it's
Yeah.
really interesting.
And I think when you take them out of their comfort zone as well. So we, on our leadership program, on a resilience part of it, we use a former head of the British Army to take them through a scenario. And that scenario is the situation in Somalia. And it's very, very complex. VUCA, the volatile, uncertain, complex and ambiguous. 20-page document, got to read it the night before, and you've got an hour to prep to present to the United Nations how you're going to solve a problem that's never been solved in 20 years. Yeah, wow. I see your eye. You can imagine now these are guys and girls that are leading construction companies, and they're looking at me as if, why are we learning about this? What do they learn? Well, unfortunately, in construction, obviously, the worst case scenario is a fatality, and you're a business leader. And the ability to assimilate large amount of information, very complex, and it's probably in the car while you're driving to a project where unfortunately there's been a fatality or whatever, and you've got to understand everything about the project, everything about the person, the individual, so that you can talk empathetically, knowledgeably about everything and deal with that in that instance, literally within a car journey. Then you walk out of there and the health and safety executive or the police are waiting to interview you, and you've got to be 100% on point about what you say, what you don't say, because you can break your business in that one situation. Now that I see them at the start of that session and they do what you did. They raise their eyebrows, they look at the ceiling, they're like, oh my God, what are we going to do here? And then they start chunking, and then they're in little groups, and they go, well, you work on that a little bit and I'll work on this and I can read this, and then they start to synthesize and analyze, and all of a sudden, and then what's brilliant is, weeks later, months later, I see them again, and the one thing they want to talk about was that fantastic experience, their worst lived nightmare, because they not only that, but while they're formulating their ideas, somebody comes and taps them on the shoulder and says, I'm the BBC, I want to interview you. What are you doing on this? And it's like, oh, well, we've decided to negotiate with the pirates. And they're like, I thought we had a policy that we don't negotiate with pirates. Oh, yeah, well, maybe not then. So thinking on the spot, working through, worst case, horrible sort of feeling when they probably sink the pit of their stomach when they first get told. And yet when they're out, and when we meet, and we have the cohorts of 2022 class, the 2023 class, and we have gatherings where we all meet together for different things, and they immediately all come together. And that's another thing that I think is, we all have a sense of needing to belong. And another thing with leadership is it's very lonely at the top. It's the pointy end of a business. Okay, you can talk to your people beneath, but you want to talk to other people who are in the same sharp end issues, not necessarily the same industries but you'd love to be able to talk and share about how your policies and your systems and how you deal with certain cases. And we've created that dynamic within these different cohorts. And I think something that's very powerful, and something that I think gets missed in terms of, like you say, you were asking me about the human-centric, the person-led or whatever. I think that, people have a natural thing that they want to belong. I'm doing some work at the moment. I'm trying to write a book on the sort of the need to belong and how you harness that to build better businesses and better opportunities. And the way to do that is obviously common objectives, common ways of working. People are either, I don't know, Camp, Apple, or they're one of the the brands, the opposite of Apple, or Nike or whatever. People will go to the ends of the earth. They'll support a football team, and they'll travel at their own cost across the country to see their team play. And it just ends up, they don't need to be paid for that. They don't need to be anything else. Why can't leaders create that sort of same energy to get that followership within their business? Everybody sort of thinks, oh, it's all about pay, or it's all about benefits, or things like the bonuses. And it's not. At the heart of it all, many people will do something for nothing if they've got that sort of alignment, that sense of belonging, something that they can align to.
I mean, I think it's absolutely fascinating the way you've drawn the learning experience and how that learning experience affects culture. So if we had, learning and development that was kind of leading from the front like that, a really kind of human centric, people first way of delivering, learning and development that was creative, pushed people's, individual sense of autonomy and decision making, maybe that might impact culture. But, I'd love to know, what you think in terms of what are those indicators, within a company that culture is either working or quietly failing, and what can learning and development do to actually impact that culture, I suppose, is an even bigger question.
Yeah. I mean, yeah, the sense of whether it's working or failing, as I say, I sometimes walk into an organization and it feels right. And there was one that I recently visited, their business, and a couple of things that I could see that were unique to their business was what I call a linear line of the sort of age profile of people within the company. So often the bad companies are in steps and big steps. And then there's that, because there's that almost that belief that a younger person couldn't possibly do what I do. So I'm not going to bring somebody young in. It's that sort of, people seem to, like they say about the police or whatever, the police seem to get younger every year, but it's not, it's everybody else is getting older. And if a company is too scared to bring in new blood because they think that they're not going to have the skills and the knowledge and the capability to do at the level that they, the sort of Dunning-Kruger effect, that people who, sort of undereducated, don't understand something, have a over optimistic view of themselves, and people, at the top who are educated maybe think that that nobody else can do what they do. I think we need to, this organization I went to, I couldn't believe how linear it was, and what that meant was there was great communication down through, because there wasn't the elders and the new coming in and a big step between them. There were layers and layers and layers through the organization. So from an HR point of view, it's maintaining that continuum. Also, when the steps become too big, then the jumps become too big in the organization. So what do? You don't promote somebody up, you bring somebody from outside, and then you lose your culture and your identity within your business. What can you do with all of that from an L&D perspective? I think, obviously it's recognizing within your organization how you build capability. So making sure that there are visible routes up through the business. I have a thing where, if we do lots of stuff around mentoring, and mentoring's very important, and I mentor a number of people within our business. But I think there's and it's only something that came up fairly recently in some conversations. In fact, it was one of our leadership events, and we invited our CEO to come along, and the CEO for the group and the CEO for our consult business. And we did what we called a fireside chat. And that fireside chat is an opportunity for those leaders to share their experiences and their journey. So it wasn't about construction. And the two of them shared it. And when we finished, they turned around to each other and said, I didn't know that about you. Because you go to work and you talk work, but they didn't realize the journeys that each of them had been through to get to where they were. Okay, I've shared it with you, but many of my colleagues at work may not know my journey. And I think it's important to understand people, not just at the level of can they do the job, because then you can start to fit round pegs in round holes as well, which is obviously the big trick with that. And you suddenly find that there's people within your business who've got a passion for design. So why not put them on, working on the slide decks or the big documents or whatever works for them, or the presentations. Why keep trying to just get them to do the finance stuff, which is the bit they hate? You can get so much more out of people just by understanding them a little bit better.
So in terms of, let's try and kind of bring all of this together, because there's so many kind of wisdoms and golden nuggets that you've kind of given us. But in terms of, the construction industry is one of those things. There are lots of health and safety and rules and regulations for obvious reasons. So just kind of stepping back, back, and this wealth of experience that you have, delivering L&D, at scale, what kind of can other industries learn specifically from an industry like construction that has rules and regulations about embedding leadership and a kind of learning culture, or the right culture, at scale?
Yeah, I think to try and get it embedded at scale, I mean, everybody falls into the trap of writing policies or systems, and they forget it's ultimately about the people, and you'll end up promoting up people because of their personal qualities, not their ability to quote the policy or the thing that you have the policy in the background. To turn that into scale, and one of the things that we do, we got a 3-step model to overcome fear of change, and is our transformation model that we use. We start with foresight, which is helping people to understand where in the distance we're going to, and sometimes that's beyond the horizon, beyond the line of visibility, around the curve, whichever way you want to look at it. But we start by sharing that. That then gives everybody an understanding of why we're going in a direction. And I think people miss that step. And they'll start at the bottom of what I'm just about to describe. So they think, and quite a lot of people come to me and they think, I'm just a learning organisation, but actually it starts much higher than that. It's a transformation organisation, and the only way I can achieve transformation is to get somebody to stand up and say, we're going to be safer, we're going to be faster, we're going to be cheaper, whatever is the driver. Now all of a sudden everything else starts to make sense. Why am I going on this course to do this? Well, I get it, we're going this way. And some people are very good at that. There's some famous sort of leadership stuff where it's shared on your social media and things like that, where there's such clarity about what sort of business they're in, and understanding what they're going to do. Then we go into our second layer, which we call insight, which is taking foresight, which is sort of very much an overview, and breaking that down into how do we deliver it. So if they say, I don't know, we want you to be more environmentally friendly, or better diversity and inclusion, or whatever, we tend to deal with that through workshop rather than L&D pure training. And we'll go and get subject matter experts from all the organisation, all the stakeholders that might be involved in that, and bring them together and go, the leadership want us to get here. Between us, we know the challenges of what's stopping us getting there. How can we work together, work out our differences, work out our plans to get to where we need to get to? And once you've distilled that, there's 2 things come out of that. One is the combined knowledge, but 2 is the buy-in. We're now going in a direction that we all believe in. We've had our chance, we've had our say, we've been listened to, all the rest of it. And then we go into the bit at the bottom of my pyramid of 3, and that is the training and the learning and the making it the standard and the way that we do everything, by making sure everybody's doing it. But everybody's bought in, because when that person comes to their workspace or whatever and goes to do something, the person above them knows why they're doing that, and if they don't do it, they challenge it, so it keeps it going. There's nothing worse than going on a course that that when you go back to your company, they're not going to do anything about it. They're not going to support. It was great. I learned all this stuff, and I think we could do this and this. Yeah, I know that was on the course. Yeah, you've been on a course, haven't you?
I just love that. And I think I've seen it so many times, but I just want to go back to this idea of strategic relevance, because
Yeah.
I think this just goes back really beautifully to what you said at the beginning of the podcast about ownership.
Yeah.
So if people are clear about the strategy, the organizational strategy, and why the learning and development is important to their specific role,
Yeah.
it then gives them a reason to actually put that learning into action. And I
Yes.
think your 3-step process just illustrates that really beautifully. But I know one of the things the audience will want me to challenge you on is, it's really beautiful the way in your kind of mid layer there, you've laid out the strategy, and then we have a working group that comes together and discusses what that means to them.
Yep.
But Let's say, so that automatically brings a kind of tension between, what actually happens, i.e. the human unpredictability,
Yes.
and let's say the framework and the strategy that, is being asked to deliver. That's a kind of a balancing and a kind of the unpredictability, I guess, of putting strategy into action in a way that's individually meaningful. I'm just going to throw that big problem at you and just
Probably,
say,
yeah. And that, if you're working in highly regulated environments, then that is it. At the end of the day, there are a set of things that you must do. And unfortunately, human behavior is for some reason designed to circumvent every rule that ever existed. You'll have people that are working with you, and you'll have people that are working against you to try and find. And people are very clever, and it's a shame they can't put the same amount of effort into doing it the right way as to circumventing, because then we could get a massive amount done. But they're going to try and find a way to make sure that they get home at 5 o'clock or whatever it is that's their motivator or their driver. Yeah, I get what you're saying, and there are certain things that you have to do, and you have to have frameworks that say. But I don't know. Maybe I've got a slightly. I mean, we've got our frameworks of things that must happen, and obviously I mentioned earlier the Building Safety Act, which has come out of the Grenfell, is driving even more of that sort of regulated behaviours. But you've got to also be careful that it doesn't stifle innovation and opportunity and things like that. So I think guide rails, sort of principles are needed. You need to know when you're inside and outside of the accepted behaviours, ways of working, procedures, but there needs to be mechanisms. And we were doing some work the other day with our facilitating for our board. We created what we called a tension board, because when you're looking at, now I'm talking about sort of leadership and values and things like that, but there are certain things that are so far inside the fence that you don't really need to talk about them, because we all know, if somebody said, if your company's sort of values are, we're going to be ethical, is there ever a situation where we're in a board meeting and we go, I think we'll be unethical on this one? It's never going to happen, is it? I think there are, and I've stolen that actually from Professor Damien Hughes, who does the High Performance podcast. He said that to us, and there's some things that are so far out of the fence line. We're gonna, I don't know, we're gonna rob a bank. That's not going to happen. It's the ones on the fence, isn't it, that decide the culture of your business. So we did the facilitation, and we created a tension board. The ones that would decide what the company really was, which ones fall that side, which ones fall that side, and allow that discussion and debate from both sides of the table, and then decide where the line is. And then once the line, one of my old CEOs used to say, you can have a voice, but once we've made a decision, you've got no choice. That's right. Because you've all got to come behind it. When we walk out here, make sure you said everything you want to say so that we've got to where we need to be. But once we've decided, we are all united in that way forward. So don't go away and go, well, I was arguing the other way. So that decision of where it's the little movements on that sort of policy, and that would be, even with regulated or whatever. So I know it's not training per se, but then all that falls from that. Once you've decided, then everybody buys into it. Then you can just go, well, that's what we do. And as I say, you don't want that situation where you go and do training, but the behaviours of the business are different. If I can do another quote from Damien Hughes, your culture is how you behave when the boss isn't watching. And I think, that cultural piece is, if you've got that line right and you've had the debate and discussion and everybody's bought into it, then you should see that everybody is behaving in the way that you intend on that position, and then the training makes sense. So there's so many little bits, isn't it? You can't just go, well, it's 1, 2, 3 and that's it, you're done. You've got to get everything so aligned and so many different aspects to get to a point where the training is valued, the behaviours are right within the company.
And I guess that kind of brings us kind of beautifully on to the whole kind of question of AI. So, I think, future technologies and the role of AI is really scary. And as you say, you have to bring people on the journey, whether you're talking about, you know, a new leadership program or a new way of doing business or a new suite of products or, you know, a new, you know, bit of regulation. It is all about that, bringing people along for the journey. How we met was obviously you are very, very interested in, you know, the cutting edge, you know, innovation and massively curious about how AI can be, you know, utilized, you know, for training and development. So I'd love to know more about that. So how do you see, you know, AI potentially completely transforming, you know, learning, and what really makes you excited? Because I know that you are so curious in this area. I'd love to know a bit more about your journey and where you think this transformation is going to happen.
Okay, so this starts back what I was saying earlier, the frustration of the sort of one-to-many teaching that is so sub-optimized for efficiency as opposed to quality of learning. And I've always been interested in, you know, the sort of technology, the AI and everything like that. And I started playing around with it and started to build a model where I thought, and I don't know how other people use AI, but for me, it doesn't give me the answer. It is a great assistant. It's a great tool to bounce ideas off of. I love bouncing ideas off it because it's consistent and it's, you know, it's got a breadth that, so I've said about, you know, going and having the water cooler moment with somebody who's knowledgeable on something. I can have a water cooler moment just now if I want to with AI. So I was using it that way anyway, and I was learning. And then I thought, well, could I write a thing where I could be trained and coached by the AI? So I created something and it worked, and it started asking me some, you know, good questions. And now, I mean, we're a few years into this now, aren't we? So but it may not sound that amazing, but the speed that things are changing, and I know you're doing masses of work, and I love our conversations about the work that you're doing. But I just felt, well, yeah, that's great. So I built this trainer for myself, a little agent that chatted away back to me, and I threw it at some challenges, teach me about Socratic questioning or whatever. They go, away it goes. Wow, great. And then I thought, but as I said earlier, I actually don't take one person's opinion on anything. I want to hear a range of opinions. So I then went and built a model that, in the construction sense, was exactly what we do when a decision has to be made. I go and a project manager brings together a team of people, health and safety, some finance, design, engineering, whatever needed. And they never, whenever you have a meeting like that, they never all go, oh yeah, that's the best solution. They've got a view that way. They've got a view that way. They're completely competing because it's going to cost too much, or it's going to be, you know, not the safest way of doing it, or it's not going to be environmentally friendly. So you've got to try and take all of that and synthesize it. And that's the skill sets we need. So I quickly shifted from wow, this is going to be great. I can go from one to many to one to one. Oh, wait a minute. Why don't I have many to one? Why don't I have a team of people telling me with different opinions and different views? So that's the way I play it. Actually, then the AI can assess me in terms of the top 3 levels of Bloom's taxonomy about the way that I'm dealing with information, not the way that because nobody needs to remember information now, because we've got it at fingertips within seconds. We can get every piece of information we ever needed. So what you need is, you know, inquisitive, inquiring minds that challenge and continue to learn. And, you know, I get frustrated. People say, oh, I don't get time to read books. Well, you've got to continue to learn. You've got to continue to grow your mind, because you know, there's stuff that I've learned, you know, very recently that you know, I'm 65 years old and I'm still going, oh, that's, you know, wow, that's great, I've just learned this. Why would you stop? Because that's where AI comes from. So the frustration with AI and you know, the risks, if you're just using an LLM, a large language model, to do your, you know, and just going to ChatGPT or whatever, it tends to try and please. And that is a frustrating thing. You know, that's why we love it so much, because it comes back and goes, great idea, Brian. Good thinking. Well done. It's always its first response is, and when I've tried to get it to be more critical, because if you're going to learn, then you can't always be right. It's when you're wrong that you need to learn. Trying to force it to be more critical has been a challenge. And I know that's something you've done a lot of work on. And, you know, I've also moved into the area of assessment. So how can you use AI to assess capabilities, and we're almost like interview technique and things like that, and where it evaluates how you performed in a situation. And again, it goes, great job, Brian. No, no, I don't want you to say great job. I want you to say you could improve in these areas.
I love that. I mean, that's a whole kind of, discussion in its own right.
Yeah.
But I want to go back to this idea that you were talking about the importance of adaptability. So you were talking about, how an organization creates a mindset where people are happy to adapt. So you talked about
Yes.
the failure. And I think when we see this in the context of leadership training, and then we overlay what are we going to do with AI, what I'd love to have your thoughts on is when you think about leadership training. So you've spoken about the positives of AI, and you've spoken about, briefly the negatives of AI. Where do you think leadership training will end up? Will it end up in a kind of human-led only, because that's where you get the discussion? Will it be, let's say, supported by AI? So you said that, you think AI is something that is out to please, so it may not be the total answer? Or can you envisage something entirely new in terms of the world of leadership training and AI?
So I think there will be AI-based learning, pure AI-based learning, and there will be pure human-led learning, and there will be a hybrid of the two supporting each other, because we still need to connect as individuals and people. It does worry me slightly where people are creating sort of synthetic relationships via AI, maybe because they haven't been able to make relationships with people, so they're now, and the AI is filling that gap for them, and that's scary, because that, whilst it comes across as empathetic and everything like that, it doesn't have that sort of capability of sort of, within it, there's some standards and code that's written in there that says about moral standards and things, but it's very narrow. And there's a lot of work at the moment about, obviously, there was an unfortunate situation where somebody killed themselves on the recommendation of AI, and you can't have that. So what does that boil down to in terms of learning? I think we'd miss something massively if we didn't work out the human interaction. And unless we're going to get to a situation where we're not managing people anymore, all we're doing is managing AI agents, then yes, that's fine. We can all go and learn everything by AI. But there's a piece around human interaction that can't be explained or written or almost taught. It's through doing it. It's through being there and listening. And one of the hardest things about being a leader isn't writing policies or standards or methods. We can all do that. It's understanding human psychology and the complexities of that. And you can read books on it and you can do all sorts of things, but until you meet somebody, and every single person is unique and different and needs a different style of leadership and management that's crafted around what their issues and problems and approach and outlook on life, personal circumstances at the time are. You can't get that unless you sort of almost touch and feel it. It's like a thing. So yes, there are some things that, in the industrialised learning part that I talked about, obviously we've done a lot of stuff around e-learning to try and get a lot of people through a way of transferring, and I know you've had very successful businesses based on some of that sort of approach. But I do think that that's where the big opportunity is, that instead of where the AI can come in and replace that instead of it just being, can I get to the last set of slides or piece of video and guess my answers and pass my test, that AI is testing me as we go through, understanding at what level I sit at, bringing me through, and then assessing me at the end to say you're within this band or wherever it is out of it, so that then from a competency point of view, you're put to work doing the right level. It might be that it's not about trying to make everybody reach a certain level. There are, people have ceilings, and I'm a great one to try and break ceilings all the time. But there are some people who just want to reach their level of competence and stay at that level. So accepting that and allowing them to be comfortable in the job that they do, because as soon as you make somebody too uncomfortable, you've got to be uncomfortable in that you've got to feel that you've stretched them. You've got to, like I said about my Somalia scenario, you push them beyond in a safe environment where they can test themselves, and maybe in small chunks you can and you do it all the time, don't we? As leaders, you ask somebody to do something that's slightly outside their comfort zone, but you're there to watch. You're there to catch them if it fails. You understand what they need to maybe move on to the next step. I'm not sure, I don't know yet how. I love the phrase, I don't know yet. My kids teach their children. That's the phrase, isn't it? For when you don't say I can't do this, you can't do it yet. So I bring that into my vocabulary. In what I know now, I can't see that you could replace that with an AI based, but there is so much that AI could take away to allow you to do that better. And
I think it's really interesting when you were talking about the tension between when do we actually know something, and typically we feel like we know something once we've been tested, and humans do that really good with other humans, and that's how we create relationships. But
yes,
as you so beautifully said, LLMs tend to agree with us all the time, so it's kind of difficult to get that aha wow moment
yeah,
sometimes, because you're not tested in the same way as
yeah,
human would. Just going back to this idea of change, we both work in organizations where AI does make people anxious, and you can feel it when you walk into rooms, in terms of what is the future going to be like. But as learning and people that are leading organizations, we obviously have to bring up the idea of AI, and we need to train people in future skills. When you look at, the construction industry and the
yeah.
organizations, the many organizations that you touch, how do you teach that future skills, that desire to be adaptable in the face of massive change, without breeding anxiety in people?
Yeah, I think one is it's got to be bite-sized, and unfortunately, I'm over here and I want them to get with me now. It's like, and if I showed them where I am now, you see sheer panic, because it's like, well, what about all this other stuff? Because obviously you're then also fighting against the tide of the press, who love to bring up the cases that didn't quite work, like the one I've mentioned. So what about if it's going to do this, and GDPR and lots of other things that come into it, and what's it going to know about me, and is it going to share that, and all the other things that are pushing against it. So it's baby steps, unfortunately, and it's frustrating because you can't get them to where you want to get to, but they've got to go. I mean, I showed somebody some stuff, some of the stuff that I've been developing, and I loved it. Their first reaction was, wow, yeah, and then they went, but, and then you knew they've gone down that curve into that space of all of those things that are triggered. So the first reaction was the one I wanted, the one that was like, this can do so much, and it's like amazing, and it's doing it. And then everything else started to come back into their mind. The I suppose different parts of different cortex within their brain started kicking in, the survival. Oh my God, I'm going to end up, if I do this, we're going to fail. It's going to be long term. So yeah, you have to give them in bite-sized chunks, where in safe environments where they can test it, they can see it work or fail, they can come with you, and then you move them and push them again in the next thing. And all of that is all the stuff we talk about, psychological safety. You're not creating an environment where they can't air their concerns, that you're just telling them you've got to do this, and actually all they will do, as I say, will fight to circumvent doing it, and then you'll spend all your effort trying to make them do it. Whereas if you can do it in those, and obviously different organizations can move at different paces, and then it's so yeah, I think it is just a case of you start, I mean, you've got sort of mindset, and then you've got processes, and you've got and you've got culture. And I think quite often people think about, quite often we get new, right, we're going to do this now. And, even within our organization, obviously we needed to go within the ring fenced world of a Microsoft solution, so Copilot, because that made sure that none of our data could be infiltrated. That's what we believe. You've got to, that created somebody feeling safe, that they were allowed to do things and play in sort of a sandbox that wasn't going to cause any damage outside of what they're doing. I also love the pirate theory that somebody like Apple, Steve Jobs did. You spot someone and they're good, you come and you go and create an area over there, you call it the pirate, you come and join the pirates. One person come and they can play and they can do because they are willing. I mean, I'd be a pirate. I'd be there and I'm breaking the system and trying the next thing. And so everybody goes, "What's he doing?" And he's a pirate. Oh, I think I'd be a pirate. And then gradually you move them across into the pirate, and then there's nobody in the naval ship, or because you bring your advocates in first, and then they start to do it, and then everybody wants to come across, and everybody wants to be a pirate all of a sudden.
I absolutely love that. I mean, absolutely beautiful. I'm going to steal that and I'm going to use it
I stopped it.
mercilessly just
I
to let you
stopped.
know, because I'm pirating that pirate idea. I mean,
Yeah.
perfect.
Well, it wasn't mine. It was Steve Jobs, to be fair. And there's a couple of others that have talked about. I think there's a couple of others that have done it. But it is such a powerful way of just one person at a time. But there's always someone, isn't there?
Yeah.
And actually, they're dying to have a chance to be that. That maybe is what going to make the marker for them. I'm
Yeah.
going to be the innovator, and I guess I'm saying that because that's probably me.
Yeah. Most certainly
That,
you.
that
Yeah.
that's where I want to make my mark, is by going, I'm not going to do it the way we did it before. I'm going to do it a different way. Can you give me scope to do that?
Mm.
Can you create a sandbox where you feel safe for me to do that?
It sounds to me like you're a friendly pirate and a
Yeah,
pirate that is basically giving people a clear map so
yeah,
they know where you're going, and then you offer them nuggets and they decide they actually want to join your journey.
yeah,
So, I love it.
yeah.
I
And
love
the,
it.
yeah, there was one I saw. I was just trying to think which one it is, but they actually had a remit to break the company. So their job was, to go in, and in that pirate sense, I think they're as a group, is there something that we do that you can break and make it better? Break it towards a better way of doing it. And their job was just purely to break things, and instead of just going, how can we carry on doing what we've always done? Because otherwise, you become that organisation that was as relevant as it was in the 80s.
Yeah. And again, brilliant that it comes back to this idea of adaptability, because if people don't know that there's a danger of it breaking,
Mm,
they don't adopt, a growth mindset or
yeah,
adaptability skills.
yeah,
Yeah, fascinating. I want to turn now to, because obviously the podcast is called Human After All. So
yes, yeah, yeah,
we always end with this idea of, and I love the fact that we've been able to cover, the intensity of, if you want change and you want learning and development, it really does start with humans. But now turning to you, I mean, you've had such huge experience in creating impact, at scale. But what's been the hardest leadership lesson? I mean, I know you've had such vast experience, there might be difficult to just give one, but what is that leadership lesson for you personally that kind of has really kind of made an impact on how you lead?
I think the most complex thing, I mentioned it a bit earlier, but understanding the complexity of human psychology. And I didn't know that psychology was the job of a leader. I thought it. So many people think it's about being a boss, and a boss that shouts commands, command and control, and that sort of thing. And certainly in my industry as well, in construction. Whereas, human psychology and empathy is something I missed when we talked earlier. There's a book, when I found it, it was back in the early 80s, and I was just sort of in my sort of development, I suppose, at HNC, just becoming professional. And this book wouldn't be PC now, I guess. A guy called Charles Foster wrote it in '69, and it's called Building with Men. And it was in the book shelf, and the tech college. And I was allowed 5 books at a time, and I'd taken out 4 technical study books, and I had one left. And this one sat there, and it piqued my interest. And it's really fascinating that it explained, within a construction context, this guy who was an educated guy, bought a building company, and he wrote the book about human behavior, and he looked at the human psychology of, without describing it as human psychology, I didn't know that that's what I was reading at the time, but I just knew that everything he said made sense. It was around a human centric approach to leadership, and all of a sudden it was a lights on moment for me, light bulb moment, where it was, it's a job. Getting people to be their best is a job. It's not just about taking the specification and telling them whether you got to do it. It's about bringing the best out in people and finding ways to allow that to happen. And I got to the end of it, and I'm like, you know, this isn't the original book. I had to go on Amazon and find a copy of it, because I had to go back to it and say, is it still relevant as it today? And it is. Every aspect. Well, it's in pounds, shillings, and pence, which is a bit odd, but yeah, there is so much that took me on that journey, from that first point. And if I went through a series of others, there was a guy called Ricardo Semler, and he wrote a book called Maverick, which was about a different approach to running a business. And I suppose I was at an impressionable age, and it struck home to me because it was allowing decisions to be made at a much lower level. And if you can't get hold of that book, there's another book now, which is Corporate Rebels, that came out recently. And these guys, I'm not, nothing to do with me, I'm not plugging the books, but these guys, they loved what what's it book that had been written, and they've gone off and seen if it's still relevant now, and they've gone around the world, and they found that if you allow decisions, get rid of a lot of the hierarchical structure and allow people to make decisions at the level where the problems are occurring, you get so much more out of the people. I don't subscribe to any one particular way. I've got lots of books I've read. People often say, well, do you then go and make that the 10 steps that he says in that book? I don't. I take bits of everything all the way along the journeys, and there's bits in there that I really like. There's bits within other information that I read, but at the heart of it all comes back to understanding the complexity of human psychology, because if you don't understand that, you can't lead, and you can't get people. Leadership is only when people follow you. It's not when they want to follow you, not they're told to follow you.
Yeah, absolutely brilliant. So in terms of the impact that you think you've made, so in terms of what you think or you'd like to think people will say about the work that you've done, what do you hope they carry forward from the work?
Yeah, I want people to remain curious, that they believe, and I want them to create an environment where, as I said a minute ago, they create followership. I've done some great stuff in some of the courses that we run around what does followership look like, and the military, for all what people perceive them as a command and control, that doesn't work for them anymore. They are working in battlefields that are not where you're sending thousands of people in. You're working, they're working within streets and things like that. So they've got to allow, they've got to state their intent and allow people to do things within their own areas. And they've almost got to want to do it, not because they've got to do it. Because when you're, and in any situation, when you're in the thick of it and there's two options and you want them to take the one that you as a leader need them to take, if it's not the natural path, you see all these things where, again, in my world, somebody designs a street layout and they put a wonky footpath through, and you can go on social media and you see people just walk through the middle of it, and the natural walking path isn't to follow the line. So if you're creating strategies and plans that people can't naturally follow, they will make their own path through the middle of it. They will bypass all of your guide rails and everything like that. So creating followership and not being a boss. So often I've had people who've been colleagues, and then when they become boss, their whole demeanor changes and they think they have to behave differently towards me as a person or against somebody else or whatever. That isn't beneficial to anyone. That's not, it doesn't get the best. So yeah, create people that want to follow.
You've spoken about some of the books that really kind of impacted, your thinking, but how would you summarize what influenced most your understanding of what it means to lead with humanity?
Well, there was one person, I guess, if I name, there's a guy, he was one of the owners at Mace, that I actually knew him way before Mace, when I was doing industry change, and he was a leader in that. And despite his position as, of an owner of one of the biggest construction companies in the UK, and then later, globally, he had true humility. I often hear, people's value, companies' values or their statements that they put on the wall, and you struggle to quote them again. He described what he set out to do when he set up Mace. And I mean, Mace is only 35 years old, so it wasn't that long ago that the six of them set it up. And he said his values were do the right jobs for the right people, using the right teams for the right price, so we can have fun. Yeah, and I bet if I asked you to quote that back, you pretty. I mean, okay, maybe not to your world, but for me, I can say it every time. I didn't have to memorize it. I didn't have to learn it. It struck a chord with me that if we could just do that, and they're simple, aren't they? You want to do the right jobs. They're the ones that, when the client doesn't come at you with something that's not practical or can't be done or wants to do it a stupid price, and you want to have a great team around you to do it, and that we all make a decent bit of money out of it all. But ultimately, let's have some fun, because without the fun, nothing's worth doing. And it's unfortunately he's no longer with us, but he just gave me my values, I guess.
A great example of somebody that you've learnt from who was more senior, but in your experience, growing and building people, when was the last time you found yourself learning from the people that maybe you were teaching?
I don't know if you're going to guess what I'm going to say here, but all the time. There is not, if I didn't go into a classroom and learn something from it, then I failed, because there is just, okay, they're there to learn, but there is such a richness in the room that you'd have missed an opportunity if you didn't take an opportunity. I mean, the people I mentor, I come away learning. In fact, one of the things that we've just done, so I sit on a number of advisory boards advising small businesses, and I do that through a government organisation that asks blue chip companies to help small businesses. I do it for that. On my leadership program, one of my challenges was homework. Leaders don't like to do homework. So the classic thing is keep a diary of what you did and tell us about it next time and how that affected. And they've written it on the night before, to try and fill out the dates, so it looks like they did something. So I replaced it with getting all of these leaders to sit on as advisors on businesses. Now, because why would I do that? Because they've come on this course to learn, and now all of a sudden they're advising a small business. But when do you learn the most? You learn the most when you teach. So, so it must be that you're receiving something back. So when, we put them out there and we got them advising small businesses, they came back, they'd learned so much. I mean, obviously you learn from the other advisors either side of you, but from the company themselves, aspects and views about your business. It was true homework. They really did learn something from it. Turning it around, that it was a byproduct of giving.
Yeah, I think it goes back to that when you have friction. And certainly it's difficult to do that with LLMs, but that is, and when you're applying the learning, that is almost when you have the benefit of the learning, when you're actually being tested on it.
Yeah, stretched and pushed, and
exactly.
Taken outside of your comfort zone. And don't get me wrong, I know I gave that example of LLMs, like ChatGPT and others, but obviously language models, those language models are designed to be like that. That's what they need, so that everybody's comfortable with them, and it doesn't. If the first time you dealt with ChatGPT, it came back and criticised you, you probably would never go back to it. So,
Well, exactly.
But in the right environment, so there are ways of tuning large language models to be able to do it, but not the ones that are just a chat. The ones like you're doing, where you're putting the knowledge behind it. You can start then tune it to be more critical.
It's been a fantastic conversation. I just want to thank you for your time. But what does it actually mean to say human after all, for you?
Systems need to bend with people, not break the people. We need to, there are certain things that we do as humans, and that judgment, compassion, humour. You're not going to replace that. You can ask ChatGPT to create a joke, but that's not humour. That's not working. The judgment and the compassion are human traits that you're going to, it's going to feel false. And judgment is a whole series of weighing up. I suppose I'll end up with, so we're not there yet. I think it has to be around the people and allowing people to make judgment and show compassion.
Fantastic. Well, Brian, it's been a really fascinating, and what I've really enjoyed is actually the depth of our conversation. It's really clear to me, and obviously it will be to our audience, that not only do you think about things, but you've also walked the walk. And I think that's really what, I love hearing about, practical applications and the practical challenges of some of the things that you've done to impact organisations. So I want to thank you for your time, and
Thank you.
I'm sure that the audience will be interested in potentially reaching out to you. Where is the best way to get in contact with you? Is that through LinkedIn? And if so, we'll certainly put that. Great.
Yeah,
And we'll put the
my
link on the bio. And I'm sure the audience would also love to have those books. So we'll make sure that we put those in the back of the clips as well. But yeah, thank you very much for your time. I've really enjoyed speaking to you. Happy to say that this isn't the first time we've spoken, but certainly look forward to speaking to you again. Thank you,
Looking
Brian.
forward to it as well. Thank you very much. Thanks.